going over a couple stories here that I found that were of good interest, I thought. They sound very interesting. Um, so they're both in the same year. They're both on different months within that year of 1952. But yeah, I mean, I thought that sounded pretty cool. So we're going to start off with the first one, and that is the Great Smog of 1952 in London. That happened. Um, so I guess deep into the winter time of 1952, London, England, um, the town fell into a strange, devastating fog that I guess it came from coal mining production, is what I was reading. Um, but there were so many airborne pollutants that they basically had to stop traffic. Like no one could run a car, just because it was so bad. The visibility was horrible. No one could breathe. Hospitals were just filled to the gills with people that couldn't breathe from all the pollutants outside. Um, and it went on for 5 days. So that, if you can imagine, just basically almost a week of nothing happening. Everything just comes to a complete stop, and no one can drive, no one can get out and do stuff. I'm sure schools were all closed, stuff like that. Only, hospitals were open and emergency services and things of that nature. Um, but yeah, I mean, what caused it? Um, Coal production. There was a natural air pollution of the air besides the coal production. I believe that was a cause of it. Let's see. Weather inversions or inversions could create fog, and they said that sometimes that mixed in with this pollutant fog. So it was like you have cloud fog and the pollutant fog going on. But yeah, I think it was just basically wherever the coal operation plants were, that air would just seep down into London, England, and I mean that'd be horrible. I couldn't even imagine. Um, couldn't imagine how bad that would be. So, I mean, we had the Dust Bowl, and I'm sure, according to history, that was pretty bad as well. But I couldn't imagine something this day and age that happening, especially on that kind of scale, that kind of magnitude. So that's the first story, and there was 12,000 people that died from that smog that happened, and the main cause of death was hypoxia. It's where parts of your body can't get oxygen um, because the particulates of that pollutant are obstructing, your airwaves and stuff like that. Um, it, they say 4 to 6 thousand people died from it, but then they've had new estimates come out over time, whereas we're more around 10 or 12,000. So the the smog started on, I think it was December 5th and ended on the 9th, and it was just like it was a big bad deal for London, and I never really knew about that. Never read about that in school, and if we did, I definitely was not paying attention. It's just kind of one of those things I think that happened that you just don't hear about. It's not in a lot of textbooks and things of that nature. So that's story number one. Story number two is one that I've always found super intriguing and one that really never gets talked about anymore. And that is In 1952, Washington, D.C., there was a number of UFOs that literally flew over the White House, straight over it. And there was just thousands of people that saw this. And it, it's like, it doesn't get talked about that much. And I think that's kind of what triggered, if it didn't trigger it, I know that's what a main focal point of Project Blue Book was, that the Air Force sanctioned. And it's just something that I wish was, investigated a little bit more and talked about. Of course, I know we didn't have really the resources back then to even do such thing, but I guess earlier in that day there was a Air Force pilot that had seen some strange objects on radar around a couple airports. I guess Andrews Air Force Base was one of them, and said that the lights didn't have characteristics of like shooting stars. There were no trails. They traveled faster than any shooting star that he'd ever seen, and that, I mean, to me, that says something. And if a pilot's telling you that, then obviously you're dealing with something that's beyond like man-made capability. So, but yeah, so there was like a certain span of days that this happened. It was like July 26th and 27th, I believe, 1952, is when it happened. It was around 8:15 p.m. I think was some of the first observed objects that were seen flying into Washington. So, and I think some of them were actually above one of the planes that was flying around in that area. And that's kind of, people didn't have phones back then. They couldn't like look out the window and take a picture, like you can today with a smartphone if you see something. And but yeah, I don't know. I think it's very interesting though that that did happen, and it's just like, we haven't seen anything since then of that nature. I mean, we've seen UFOs, don't get me wrong, all over the place, but like right over DC, I mean, you just don't, that close to the ground. Yeah, that just doesn't, hasn't happened like that yet, and I don't know if it ever will, but um, yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy. I mean, people see things every day and they get videos and pictures, and some of it's very compelling. Um, there actually was a remake of Project Blue Book on, I want to say it was Amazon. I want to say it's Amazon. Yeah, the Amazon streaming app. Anyways, it's kind of like a documentary slash TV show of a lot of the Project Blue Book accounts and recordings that they did. And like I said, it was sanctioned by the U.S. Air Force. And yeah, interesting stuff though. I would definitely check out that show if you're into UFO, UAP, stuff like that. And anyways, yeah, that's story number two. That's just something that's really crazy. I wish cameras and video cameras were high tech back then and they were out and they could have caught that. I mean, I don't even know if there's any photos of it. Like, I've searched and scoured the internet and I can't even find anything that's remotely close to what happened. I mean, there's like blurry images all the time you find of stuff, but you don't know where it's from. But anywho, some of the evidence that you see, is pretty compelling, and I don't know if there's any Project Blue Book reports that are visible online. And even if they are visible, you don't know if they're actually legit or not. There's really no way to vet the source and see where it came from and whatnot. But you just kind of have to leave yourself to wonder, is that really, you know, something that really happened? But the original Flying Saucers over Washington, D.C. newspaper article, read Saucers over Washington, D.C. Harry G. Barnes, Senior Air Route Traffic Controller for the Civil Aeronautics Administration, was in charge of the National Airport at Washington, D.C. Control Center the night of July 19th, 1952. Briefly, he states in a newspaper article, our job is to constantly monitor the skies around the nation's capital with the electric eye of radar. Shortly after midnight on that date, seven pips appeared suddenly on the control center scope. Ed Nugent, Jim Copeland, and Jim Ritchie, all experienced radar controllers, checked the observations. The airport controller tower, radar operator guy, verified the same sighting. They were all over the restricted areas of Washington, including the White House and the Capitol. Because I mean, you can imagine how restricted that airspace is. Like, you can't not just fly over Washington, D.C. You know, it's the capital of our country, and I'm just like, you can't, definitely cannot do that. So I don't know. So there was like 3 experts that looked at it, you know, and they're like, no, these are not aircraft. This is completely something else. So anywho, I just want to thank you guys tonight for watching. These are just 2 stories that I did find that I wanted to make a part of a story with Rory News Hour. So if you guys get a chance to, I guess, Google the stories or whatnot and take a look into both of those, then check them out, because they're definitely both worth reading and both worth looking into. So I guess until then, you guys be safe and have a good evening. Until I see you next time, we're out.